Hey guys, welcome into the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I'm Simone Eli alongside Ben Flanagan again this week. We are talking Alabama's big win over La Monroe, 63-7, the final from Bryant-Denny Stadium, a dominant win by the Tide at home in week 3 of the college football season. Ben, first of all, just your overall thoughts taking away from this game.
Yeah, look, after a close call in Austin last week, we obviously had a lot of questions going into the La Monroe game. Like, does Alabama have offensive problems that they can't overcome this year? Can Will Anderson find the same gear that he had last year?
Yeah.
Or can you get a beer for less than $9 in Bryant-Denny Stadium? The answer is no. But you can get a giant soft pretzel now for $14. So keep that in mind for Vandy next week. That was a new addition that I noticed. $14 pretzel, I just noticed. And a lot of people were buying them. It was amazing.
How big was the pretzel?
I mean, it was like big.
Okay.
Big.
$14?
$14. I mean, I guess you got $14 worth of pretzel. But anyway,
Okay.
That's neither here nor there. It was important today. But look, I mean, Alabama fans whined all season all off season, I should say, about a subpar home schedule in 2022. And look, they're not wrong, but I mean, my initial takeaway so far this season is that they couldn't have asked for a better situation for this team and the Heisman winning quarterback that came back to iron out the kinks that they might have before they go into the SEC gauntlet. So look, no Bryce Young. He hasn't been perfect. I don't think that we would hand him another Heisman trophy after his first 3 games, but I think that we demand a little too much and we lose sight of what he does so well for Alabama. We talked about his poise last week, and everybody knows the guy delivered big time in the fourth quarter and saved Alabama from getting upset by an unranked team. But, I mean, I think he would tell you above anybody else that he's got a lot to improve on. So does the Alabama team. And to come away from a 63-7 win thinking of all that you have to improve on means that your team is probably in a better place than you think it is.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Ben. That's pretty much put that as perfectly as you can. Getting some questions here. Scotty Lewis says, still a lot of questions on offense. I think one of the biggest questions, Scotty, is who is Bryce Young's main target? And we've seen in years past, not only with Young, but previously as well, Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, really some guys emerge as the main receivers in the receiving core who were going to be the main threats. We kind of have not seen that as much so far, Ben. It's not been an issue too much in the first 3 weeks of the season, but we definitely could see it become something during the gauntlet of the SEC when that arises.
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the driving narratives of this season is that Jamison Williams is gone. John Mechie is gone. Like, Bryce Young has to find another option down the field. Jermaine Burton appears to be sort of that guy, that burner guy, that deep threat, but they have yet to really click on the deep ball 3 games into the season. The plays are there. Burton appears to be capable of finding the separation that he needs, but they just haven't found the rhythm. But you have to think that they will, just based on their talent, Bryce Young's experience, and they just need some time. The good news, though, is that Bryce Young seems to see the field as well as he ever has, and Alabama has so much talent that so far he's kind of spreading the love to a variety of guys, including Burton, including Trayshawn Holden, Ja'Cory Brooks, guys we've never even seen or heard of before, like today with Amari Niblack. I mean, the 2 guys that Bryce Young seems to be most comfortable with passing, and who I think are Alabama's 2 best pass catchers right now, are Jahmyr Gibbs and Cameron Latou. So this is a luxury for Alabama that they've got so many capable weapons for Bryce Young to get acquainted with as the season gets more difficult. And I think that we've only scratched the surface with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, which, again, that's a great thing. So watch out for a huge season from him, especially as he develops into what I think will be Bryce Young's favorite target.
Yeah, Ben, I think, though, how you said it off the top of the show really speaks true. Bryce Young is almost masking the fact that Alabama might not be as dominant offensively as they are because he is so dominant offensively, and really because he is such a great high IQ football guy. He sees the field so well, like you said, and he makes everyone else around him better. It's kind of like the point guard in a basketball game. Like, he just makes the guys around him flourish. He's been able to do that so far. Bryce did have 2 interceptions today. Let's talk about those plays briefly. Kind of just some miscues. It seemed like, again, I never played quarterback, so I'm not going to sit here and say what he saw, didn't see, bad throw, bad whatever, but just my, just from 100 yards away, looking at what that looked like to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all of the great things that we can say about Bryce Young, we have plenty of time to do that. But, some people consider him already to be Alabama's best quarterback of all time. He's the only Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at Alabama, but he still has a few things to work on, obviously, especially before he goes to the next level in the NFL. He had 2 head-scratching interceptions, like you mentioned today, the first in the opening quarter, playing off of what people seem to think is one of his big weaknesses still as quarterback, that he hangs onto the ball a little too long while he's looking downfield and working through all of his progressions. That happened, and then he forced the ball downfield straight into the arms of a ULM Monroe defender. It was head-scratching, quizzical looks on all the faces of Alabama fans in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Later, he'd do the same thing. He'd get sacked while he was just sort of like hanging onto the ball in the pocket and looking downfield. So he has good protection. He's got excellent pocket presence, poise, awareness. So he's looking at all of his options. But, yeah, sometimes he should probably get rid of the ball sooner than he does. But, again, we go back to the whole main idea. Which quarterback would you rather have than Bryce Young?
Yeah, no question. Being great doesn't always mean that you have to be perfect. Obviously, you want to get those 2 passes back. But again, Bryce Young dominant today. 13 of 18, not a ton of pass attempts. I think I read on Twitter somewhere, Mike Casagrande, I think it was, who said that's the least amount of pass attempts that he had in his time as a starter. 3 touchdown passes, 236 in the air. Let's talk about Will Anderson Jr. really quick. Last week, this was a guy who made some mental errors that I don't think I ever would have expected from Will Anderson Jr. But then he makes a great play today. Defensive effort really total, all in all. Then he scores a touchdown to kind of come back from what was not the greatest situation in Austin, regardless of the win, to make that play. I mean, that was a nice redemption moment for him, I felt like.
Yeah, the highs with Will Anderson are so insanely high that you forget about the lows because there are so few of them. But he's had, strangely, some lows that we didn't expect this year. And look, we're in the business of overreacting, right?
Yes,
but I refuse to do so when it comes to Will Anderson. Like, this is still the baddest man in college football. Does he have some early season jitters that, after a shaky performance in Texas last week with multiple penalties? Yeah, maybe he has those jitters. Did he carry over those jitters, or did it carry over with an ill-timed horse collar tackle on 3rd down? Yes. Would I say it to his face? No. Will Anderson, look, he seems overhyped to me, like early this season. I mean, there's obviously a lot of expectations for how he'll perform throughout this season. People have already labeled him a Heisman finalist, a potential winner, which is always a mistake going into a season. But look, like Bryce Young, he's got a few games to work all this out of his system. I thought that it was interesting to me after that horse collar tackle that Will Anderson came out of the game for several plays. And I think that led to some sloppy play overall from Alabama, including ULM Monroe's only scoring drive. But I think it proves that they sense some concerning patterns and that no one is above getting called out for making mistakes. And, the best thing is I guarantee you that Will Anderson is always going to be the first person to point those things out. But, it was awesome to see him get a pick 6. That was amazing. But I took my daughter to this game, and I was in the snow cone line when that happened. So I had to watch it on the TV in the concourse. So I appreciate Bryant-Denny for having me covered in that regard.
I appreciate your transparency on that, Ben. And good for your daughter for getting you out to the snow cone line in a game that was 63-7. That's probably where you belong at that point. But although that was kind of early in the game. Let's talk about some other bright spots for Alabama. Special teams, punt returns. I covered Kool-Aid McKinstry in high school. I mean, this is a guy who is just such a talent, such an athlete, and he showed that today. 5 returns for 136 yards. Bama went for 262 on punt returns. Add in the kick return by Gibbs. Just a really, really good day, it seemed like, special teams. And obviously the blocked punt situation. So just a lot of good things happening overall.
Yeah, I think Alabama fans should probably breathe a sigh of relief when it comes to this because, this is one phase of the game that has felt like an Achilles heel at times for Alabama. It's become a huge plus, primarily behind – if we're just talking strictly special teams, behind Will Reichard's just outstanding place kicking. He's become so reliable. But today, as you mentioned, with punt blocks, punt returns, recoveries for touchdowns, a punt return for touchdown, them breaking their single game punt return yards record behind the guys you mentioned, Kool-Aid McKinstry and obviously Brian Branch. I think one of the big takeaways from this performance today is Kool-Aid McKinstry returning punts. I mean, the return game was a big question mark for 2022. They spent most of last year sort of developing JoJo Earl in that role. They used Slade Bolden mostly just to field punts for possession. But it looks like Alabama has a real weapon back there now in McKinstry after some electrifying returns today. So I consider this a huge development for Alabama.
Yes, no doubt about that. If you're just tuning in, it's the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. The SEC schedule is about to get underway, Ben. Vanderbilt to town. Then things get kind of serious. So we're talking about Arkansas. We're talking about Texas A&M, Tennessee. It's really just the gauntlet of the SEC schedule, if you will. Is Alabama ready? Let's not talk about Georgia yet. Let's just say, does Alabama have enough questions answered going into week 4 when it comes to the SEC schedule to feel comfortable right now?
Look, even Vandy, right? Like, spare me the Vandy jokes, but SEC play starts next week, technically, right? Alabama's going to see a different caliber of athlete even starting next week. And they had a great test from Texas last week. And I know people kind of roll their eyes when it comes to Vandy. They consider them kind of a glorified cupcake. But look, they're running out of time to make the necessary improvements they need to make and that it'll take to compete at the highest level in the best conference in college football. And there's a lot to clean up. You know, they had fewer penalties today, but they still had 6 for 60 yards. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody out there, I think they're still kind of behind on the turnover margin in the first 3 games, which is obviously where an elite team does not want to be. Yeah. So look, Alabama waltzed into the season ranked number 1, even ahead of the reigning national champs, the team that beat them in the last game of the season last year. And so it does sort of like bring you to that Georgia question, right? Like, is there a gap between Alabama and Georgia right now? Like, Alabama's blown out Utah State and La Monroe. They struggled against their best non-conference opponent in Texas. Yeah. Georgia blew out Oregon. They blew out South Carolina today. So does that mean anything right now? Like, I don't know. We're still learning a lot about college football in 2022 on the whole. So, you know, it's hard to really know like where these two teams, especially Alabama, really fit into it. Mm-hmm. It won't matter if they handle their business and they meet in the SEC title game, but there's just still such a long way to go. And we really just have to see how Alabama measures up to Tennessee and Arkansas on the road, Ole Miss on the road, and yes, Vandy next week.
Yep. Like Adam put it in the comments, Ben is exactly right. I mean, there's nothing else I can even say, nothing even else to ask at that point. Ben just answered your question. There you go. I mean, honestly, there's no point in sense in breaking down. Is there a gap between Georgia and Alabama? How can you really determine that? It's apples and oranges when it comes to opponents. But I think that there's a reason that Alabama was bumped down in the poll to the second-ranked team. And I think there's a reason that Georgia is the number 1 ranked team in the country right now. They've been absolutely dominant. We saw that today against South Carolina.
Yeah, and look, you're going to hear a lot of talking heads sort of parroting what they said last year when it came to Georgia, that they're this unstoppable force in the SEC. Expectations were a little bit lower for Georgia going into this season. They lost so much talent to the NFL, and everybody thought they're going to have a down year. They got their championship. Yeah. They'll have to reload. Maybe it'll take another year for them to reach the mountaintop again. It's Alabama's year with Bryce Young in his second year, et cetera. But I think after a couple of weeks now, to see who Georgia has played and the way that they've played and the level that they seem to be at right now, people are going to just presume that they're the future national champs again. They're going to repeat. I'm not there yet. And I'm also not writing off Alabama's chances either. But look, like Nick Saban says, why do we play the games? You know, lucky for us, everybody gets to settle it on the field. And if these two teams get to play each other, great, we'll settle it on the field. But between now and then, I think that, like you mentioned, the SEC is going to be a gauntlet. You've got teams like Tennessee. You've got teams like Arkansas. I mean, LSU and Mississippi State are battling right now, and both of those teams are on Alabama's schedule. So, I mean, before they can even dream of thinking about Georgia, they got a lot to handle.
Certainly right. I was going to talk about what's going on in the SEC. While y'all might have been at the La Monroe game, Auburn took one on the chin there against Penn State, 41-12, the final from the Plains. Probably the most embarrassing losses that the Tigers have ever taken, ever at home specifically. Not really sure how you bounce back from that one. We'll see. But like you said, Mississippi State and LSU going head-to-head right now, 1-point game in the 4th. And then tonight, the Texas A&M playing Miami. Ben, this is a game we're talking about in the pregame show a little bit. Just interesting to see this matchup. And I saw a picture of Ed Ogeron at this game in a Miami shirt, like as a spectator, like walking around. Like, I mean, he's like living his best life.
There's video too. There was photos of him like walking around wearing a Miami shirt, but he's on the sideline now, and somebody got a video of Coach O saying "Go Canes." So
wow.
Look, they're only in college football.
Literally, like, what is he doing?
Only in college football can this kind of thing happen, where you have characters like Coach O, and now he's wearing a Miami shirt. He's trolling Texas A&M. Lord knows what Jimbo thinks if he spots that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just the greatest sport on earth.
No doubt about that. Well, guys, Week 3 of the college football season, Lord knows, is only going to get more interesting from here. That is for sure. Ben, we appreciate all of your insight. As always, you are one of the best. We appreciate that. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in to the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Ben Flanagan, I'm Simone Eli. We will see y'all next week. Have a good day.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.